So today's guest is Dr. Stephen. He is a chiropractor and a nutritionist, and he has some fantastic experience. He's a heart attack survivor, and he's also type 1 diabetic. So I thought he would be a really good guest on the podcast because piggybacking on the podcast earlier this season with Dr. Corey talking about blood pressure, Dr. Stephen goes into how heart attacks is not necessarily a cholesterol issue or diet issue, but an overload of the system, pinpointing with EMFs, grounding, the importance of grounding, using getting enough red light, managing stress, and of course, watching the inflammation. So I really hope that you enjoy this podcast.
Of course.
Yeah, where did you get your DC at?
University of Western States.
Okay.
I
Are
guess it
you
was Western States Chiropractic College when I first started going there, but
do you live out there?
no, I just went out there for school and then moved to Europe and then came back. Now I'm in Virginia,
Okay. Oh, Europe. What part?
Ireland.
Oh, I love Ireland.
Yeah, I lived there for 2 years and they kicked me out, so I had to come home.
Yeah, one of my girlfriends practices over there. Completely jealous of that. Really cool
Yeah,
area.
that was my first job was in Ireland. It was kind of a mess, but it was a great experience. So
Thank you so much for coming on.
yeah, of course. Happy to do it.
I will go ahead and let you introduce yourself.
I am Dr. Stephen Hussey. I guess my day job is as a chiropractor. I also have a master's degree in human nutrition and functional medicine. Um, so yeah, day in, day out, I practice chiropractic. And then I also have an online health consulting business, where I consult with clients all over the world. I do speaking and I've written 3 books, which are The Health Evolution and Understanding the Heart and Pain Sense. But yeah, I guess like anybody else, I got interested in health because of my own health struggles as a child and as a young adult. And, tried a lot of different things to help me with those struggles. And nothing really helped until I started changing my lifestyle and learning way more things than I was ever taught in school and, trying all that stuff. And I've had some pretty, I guess, um, miraculous, according to Western medicine, healing that happen to me by different strategies. So it just keeps pushing me further and further into the alternative health world. And I wouldn't even call it alternative. It's just like, what creates health in humans and trying to figure out why life is here and how life sustains itself. But yeah, so we can get into any and all that. I'm sure we will. So
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very intrigued with, the timeline because like you said, a lot of us get to where we are based on our own health. You're a chiropractor. Did you get your nutrition degree while you were in chiropractic school or did that come after?
just after, yeah. So the school I went to, University of Western States, had just launched like maybe 6 months prior to my graduation from chiropractic school. They launched their human nutrition and functional medicine master's program, which was like half in person, half online at the time. So I did that after chiropractic school.
Wonderful. And then I have noticed that you are type 1 diabetic, correct?
Yep.
How long have you been diagnosed with that?
Since I was 9 years old.
Wow.
And that combined with a lot of inflammatory conditions when I was a kid, everything from asthma to chronic hives to IBS to allergies. And then eventually autoimmune type 1 diabetes or quote unquote autoimmune type 1 diabetes. That's what threw me and my family into, medicine, like asking them, like, what do we do about this? And it was always manage the symptoms, not really an explanation of what the causes of these things were. And so it wasn't until college that I started to figure out that could reverse most of those conditions, aside from the type 1 that had already happened with lifestyle stuff. And so I was like, well, that's weird that no doctors ever really told me that. And that's what in college is when I started to get really interested in health and knew I wanted to become some kind of health practitioner and went from there.
Exactly. So share with us, because you're young, your experience with the heart attack, how you went through the Western medicine approach. Did you see it coming? And what have you done alternative natural to help prevent any recurrence?
Yeah, so this could be a long story,
Yeah,
but
I'm very interested.
yeah, so um, yeah, so I reversed all those inflammatory conditions. I no longer have those aside from the type 1 diabetes, which heavily predisposed me to heart disease. And I knew that for a long time. And, I'd always been really good at diet and exercise. Those are the ways I took care of myself, from graduation, from any schooling at like 26 years old, all the way up until age 34, when, yes, I had a widowmaker heart attack. And yes, there was no way to see it coming. I had no atherosclerosis in my body anywhere. 6 months prior to this heart attack, I had a CAC score done, which is a measure of how much calcified plaque there is in the arteries of your heart. And I had 0, which is a perfect score. That doesn't measure soft plaque. But when I had the heart attack and they did the heart cath to place the stent, bust the clot and place the stent, they saw no atherosclerosis anywhere. They just saw a clot, a giant clot that formed in the left anterior descending artery, which is the most common place for heart attacks to happen. So yeah, there was really no indication, I guess, aside from me being type 1 and that predisposes you to heart disease.
Sure.
But I had no vascular, pathology going on. It was just a spontaneous clot that formed. And so I really, delved into the heart and heart disease, even prior to that, because I'm predisposed as a type 1, but especially since after. And so, yeah, I was sitting there in the hospital, and all they could tell me when I would ask, say, what happened? What did you find? What caused this? And I knew what they were going to say. They were like, well, it's cholesterol. Cholesterol is what causes these things, and that was the answer I got from every doctor, intern, resident that I saw.
Sure.
And I was just like, all right, fine. But at that point, I was just like, I was pretty demoralized, and I was like, okay, throw my hands up, like, what do you have for me? Like, I'll do what you say to an extent. But after 3 days in the hospital, I was like, okay, I won't do what you say,
Mhm.
because what they gave me was the wrong advice according to the literature, not just my opinion, but like doesn't stack up to what the literature shows.
Right.
And I'm not giving any medical advice or saying that this will be the case for everybody else. But for me, I personally, based on my information, and how I felt about things, decided to ignore their advice, because their advice was, well, first of all, they said it was all about cholesterol, which there's no research to support that. Um, and also, while I was in the hospital, they prescribed 11 different medications.
Oh my God.
Um, and they told me that I'd be on 5 of those the rest of my life, which were a cholesterol medication, a statin, 2 blood pressure medications, a blood thinner, and then a baby aspirin for the rest of my life. And I was like, well, that sounds crazy. And I knew the evidence against that, like that those if those things made us healthy, then we'd be the healthiest country in the world because we take 80% of the world's drugs. So if those things created health, we'd be a healthy country, and we're not. We rank like 40th, I think, in health outcomes in America. So um, there's nothing wrong with like drugs in acute situations and how they can help us get through an acute situation, but they're never going to create health or prevent disease. And that's very clear based on literature. So, you know, that and then, just a lot of things like they wanted me on the blood thinner because I just had a stent placed. And that makes sense. There's a foreign body in there. Like, we don't know if that's going to create clotting. And so I did take the blood thinner for, well, half the dose of the blood thinner they wanted me to, for 6 months. And that's all I did. Um, and that was because I consulted with a cardiologist who's more in the know, I would say. And that was his advice to me. So, yeah, but then they also told me to eat basically a processed food diet.
Right.
They came in and they said, this is the heart healthy diet. It was all the low saturated fat and low salt and all this stuff. Like literally animal crackers and fig Newtons and vegetable oils were on the list of what I could eat that was okay to eat. It was the heart healthy thing to eat, which is just terribly concerning. And so I started to, very quickly regain my wits about me and be like, all right, this is not what I need to do. And even just bringing up things like, oh, well, what about magnesium? That's been shown to be a blood thinner. And the doctor literally said, magnesium is not a blood thinner. And I was like, okay. I mean, I know there's studies that show that is, and I actually even found studies that show that after stent placement in animal models, the intravenous magnesium was just as effective as blood thinners for preventing a clot. Now, that doesn't mean that they have a protocol for that in the hospital and that they can do that because they can't, but it just goes to show that there's no curiosity about that. Like it's the use the thing that they can make money off of, which is the blood thinners.
Exactly.
Um, so, anyways, I left the hospital after 3 days because they didn't know what else to do with me. Usually, they'd say people who have a widowmaker are in there for a week or so, but I asked to be released because I wasn't getting anywhere, and it was just frustrating. I couldn't control my food or even my insulin as a type 1. They wouldn't let me administer my own insulin, which was super frustrating because they
Wow.
were doing a terrible job. My blood sugars were high the whole time. But I went home and I did kind of, develop my own healing routine. And 3 months later, my heart was completely back to normal because it had dropped. There was some damage to the middle of the muscle in my heart, the middle of the ventricles, the septum. But it was healed after those 3 months, and my ejection fraction in my heart had dropped to 35 to 40%, and it was back up to the 55, which is within the normal range
Nice.
within 3 months. And then um, after that, because so like in a heart cath, they go in through an artery in the wrist or in the leg, in the groin.
Right.
And they tried to go to the wrist for me, but it didn't work. So they went to the groin and the femoral artery. And when they placed the stent afterwards, they sealed it up with this device called an angioseal. And they use that device because it helps the artery heal quicker so that people can sit up faster. They don't have to lay there for 3 days while it heals, which is a concern for people who like clotting, laying there like
Right.
that. But in my case, and in many cases, because I found lots of literature on this, it can actually interfere with blood flow dynamics going down the leg. And I developed a 70 to 99% blockage of the artery in my leg. And so I'd be trying to walk fast through an airport or something, and I would have pain in my lower right leg. And I was like, what is this? I was like, this is like a DVT. Am I getting compartment syndrome? Like, what is going on? And then I realized that or I finally got the testing and it showed that there was peripheral artery disease in the femoral artery in my thigh. And so um, that was in July after the heart attack. The heart attack was in January. So I finally got that testing done in July. And, the vascular surgeon was like, well, you can't do some of the things you want to do, but you're able to go throughout your life. We're not going to mess with it because usually they get worse when we mess with them. And I was like, okay. And so I did my own healing routine again, which we can talk about. It involved lots of infrared sauna and sunlight and circadian rhythm and a few select supplements, not that many though. Um, and yeah, within 2 years, probably within a year and a half, I completely reversed that atherosclerosis in my leg.
Wow.
So it's 100% normal now. And so, the vascular surgeon, when we got the test that was normal, said, well, he said, we can't say it's better because we don't see these things get better. And I was like, well, I mean, you just saw it get better. I would have, I would have hoped that your response would have been, what have you been doing?
Right. Right.
Rather
Exactly.
than, oh, it's just not better. Like the tests aren't reliable. It's like, I can play soccer now, like, so it's definitely better. Um, don't you want to know how or why I did that? Um, and, you know, help other people do that too. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of some, I guess, bullet points of my healing journey.
Oh, wild. Did you ever figure out what caused the initial clot?
I don't think anybody will be able to tell me that for sure, but my best guess is a combination of things. I mean, the more and more I've gotten into this, it's heart disease, whether it's atherosclerosis or stroke or heart attack, is about clotting. It's not accumulation of cholesterol. It's about fibrotic clotting tissue that forms in the arteries. And so that becomes all about being about blood flow dynamics and making sure blood is flowing adequately and that there's enough blood, like hydration issues and things like that. Because if it's not, if it gets stagnant, then it's more likely to clot. And if it clots, it'll stick to something like the lining of the artery. And so when we look at that and you consider that I was probably pretty dehydrated at the time, chronically, because I was eating a pretty low carb diet, but I was not rehydrating. And when you go low carb, when you're making ketones, you need a little bit more fluid and electrolytes.
Mm.
Um, and so I wasn't doing that. I was probably having like maybe a cup of bone broth a day for like fluid.
Okay.
So yeah, I kind of convinced myself that, oh, we drink when we're thirsty, don't drink when you're not thirsty. And I think that was wrong now. Um, to that, I think I was oxalate dumping at the time, which is something that happens if you eat very low plant foods or low oxalate foods. Your body can get to a point where it starts dumping stored oxalates. And when I look back at testing, maybe 9 months prior to the heart attack, I had oxalates in my urine for the first time ever in my life, which I've had tons of urinalysis because I'm type 1. So they test that every 6 months or so for me, and that's never happened. But I see that now. So I think oxalates are coming out, which is an inflammatory type thing. Um, and then I'd been going through like a more stressful time because it was during COVID and there were lots of things happening during COVID that frustrated me. But then also a day and a half before the heart attack, I got probably some of the most stressful news of my life about a close family member. And it wasn't just the news; it was the inability of anybody in my family to do something about it. We were just waiting around, hoping this person was going to be okay and that the situation would resolve itself. And so for that day and a half, I was in this state of figuring out how I could get to her, and we couldn't. And then unwisely, the morning of the heart attack, I tried to do the same workout I usually do, which is an intense interval training workout. And I
Right.
probably shouldn't have done that. In that state of dehydration and stress and oxalate dumping, like that just created this inflammatory situation. And as soon as my like blood pressure and blood flow came back down after that workout, clot formed, and there it was.
Wow, perfect
That's my
storm.
best guess. Yeah.
Wow. Right. What all did you change post heart attack with your diet that you weren't doing? Because it sounds like you were eating pretty healthy.
Yeah, I mean, I was eating low carb whole foods and I've been doing that forever. And at this point, not just because of my story, but just because of everything else I've learned, I don't think that, I mean, diet is obviously important,
Yeah.
but it's not going to prevent disease, just diet alone.
Right.
And it's not going to be the cause of a disease, just diet on its own. Um, and so my diet really hasn't changed at all. It's still the same, very low carb, higher animal foods, plant foods in season type of diet. So yeah, and I eat that way because I think it's evolutionarily appropriate, but I also and I also know that it's very easy as a type 1 to manage blood sugars when you're very low carb. It makes it very easy. So, yeah,
And low inflammatory, of course.
yeah. Hmm.
Now, I noticed in your book, Pain Sense, you talk about mitigating EMF. What are your favorite ways that you suggest to listeners to do that? There's so many ways, right?
Yeah. And you could go down a rabbit hole doing all that because it's everywhere now. But yeah, I mean, I guess the most low hanging fruit is, um, like it's reverse square law. So, the closer the wireless router is to you, or the closer the cell phone is to you, the more harmful it is. So, the further away you can keep it when you do have to use those things, the better. So, if you have to use wireless in your home and you can't find a way to plug in directly to your computer or whatever, um, put it somewhere in your house that's far away from where you are or where you usually spend your time, like the farthest away from you possible. Try not to have your phone next to your head, have it on speaker or wherever. Don't sleep with your phone next to you. Put it in another room. Those types of things. And then, going further down the line, you could wire everything in your home so there's no wireless signals. Stop buying smart devices because they're all sending out a wireless signal that we don't need, and it's not compatible with our bodies. Or, I mean, I go as far as like I turn electricity off to my bedroom at night, because there's electromagnetic fields coming through the wires in the walls when they're not turned on to something. I sleep in a EMF radio frequency blocking canopy, that covers the whole bed, so I'm not getting any radio frequency from the neighbor's wireless or the cell tower or whatever else is around me or the airport radar, whatever it is. I'm not getting that kind of stuff. Um, but I'm still connected to the electromagnetic field of the Earth, which I want to be. That's compatible with us because it's been there forever. So yeah, you could go on and on about mitigating those strategies. But just so people understand, because sometimes people hear that and they're like, you know, they can't see it, they can't feel it. They're like, oh, it can't be that bad. But like wireless signals are a form of light. They're all in the electromagnetic spectrum of light. So they're just outside the spectrum of what the sun emits. The sun emits the visible light, all the colors, in red or infrared and UV light. And then outside of that are all man-made, frequencies of light information. And so, those the only ones compatible with this are ones from the sun or the earth. And anything else is not compatible, and they've shown that they are damaging, and then they change their physiology. They interfere with structured water. They interfere with solute distribution in the cells. They cause a lot of issues. So that's why it's important to mitigate them.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. I noticed too in the book you talk about grounding, right? So along that same perspective, what's your favorite way to ground?
Um, Directly on the earth, on a clean, pesticide-free piece of grass, that's the
No
best way.
Roundup.
Yeah, that's the best way to ground. But like I'm grounding right now, like my feet are on a grounding mat right now.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, life is all about harvesting energy. I mean, if you look at the laws of thermodynamics, energy is not created or destroyed. It's only transferred between entities. And then things that are ordered tend toward disorder. So energy tends to dissipate, to expand. And so life, in a way, is like defying the second law and creating order. Like it's concentrating energy and creating life. So we need to find ways to get that energy into our body. And all the energy for life on Earth comes from the sun. So if we can get energy from sunlight directly on our skin because we have melanin and we have DHA in our bodies that can change that sunlight into electrons. The sun concentrates energy into the earth, and then we can absorb that energy, those electrons directly from the earth because we're a conductive surface and the earth is a conductive surface, so we'll conduct that. And we can get energy from breaking down the chemical bonds in food because either the plant or the animal has stored that energy in there. And we can break it down. That's what metabolism is. It's getting energy from food. And I really, I say metabolism is just how we deal with the energy we get from our environment in the many different ways. And so grounding is one of those.
Exactly. Yeah, I think a lot of us forget to think of energy affecting us, you know? Again, we can't see it, so it's out of sight,
Hmm.
out. Yep. Do you recommend saunas? Do you like saunas?
Definitely. Yeah. So they're definitely a modern way or a modern hack that we can use to help boost our infrared light exposure. So infrared sauna is my favorite. I mean, there's benefits to heating yourself in any sort of sauna.
Right.
Just having that hormetic stress of heating yourself and then sweating and getting out toxins and things like that. But infrared sauna is just so much better because the sun is always about 40 to 50% infrared light. And so humans, used to be outside 100% of the time. And so we always had that stimulus of red and infrared light. And so we need that. And so, like our physiology, use that. And so that's what charges your body. And so now, today, we're living indoors under artificial light. We don't get that red and infrared light exposure as much as we should. And so you can use things like red or infrared light panels or infrared saunas and those types of things to boost that infrared exposure. I do think you could do too much, just
Oh,
like
yeah.
too much blue light is harmful to us. Like blue light is not bad. It comes from the sun. It's a natural thing, but on its own, and when there's too much, like when you spend the entire day under blue light in your office or something like that, um, then it becomes too much and it becomes harmful. So if red light or infrared light had been what we'd chosen to light everything with, I think we'd be seeing damage from that. And we'd be like, oh, we need more blue. It's the processing of the light and making it, one single color or wavelength of light. That's the problem. And so we need balance. So we're so in balance with blue that we can use these infrared and red light therapies to boost our red and infrared and balance that out again.
Exactly. Yeah, I know we have a infrared sauna and just absolutely love it. And the other thing that I always recommend to patients, and I know you have too, is sound therapy.
Mhm.
Yeah, just fantastic. So much research out there on that.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Um, you know, Especially the sounds of nature. They seem to be the most calming to our nervous system. They seem to have effects on water in the body that are fascinating. And they seem to actually melanin, the pigment melanin, which we know, gives us the pigment of our skin, but it's concentrated everywhere in the body. It's in the nervous system, it's in the eye, it's everywhere. It can receive many, many different kinds of energy. It can receive vibration, it can receive sound, it can receive light, all kinds of things. And when it receives that, it actually can use that to dissociate water in the body and make molecular hydrogen, oxygen, and electrons, which are exactly what your mitochondria need to function. So melanin, super important molecule, and that's one way that our bodies can use sound, harmonious sounds that are compatible with us to achieve higher levels of health.
Exactly. Now, what's your favorite sources of water? What do you recommend? Do you still think like reverse osmosis is the best? What do you do for electrolytes? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, reverse osmosis is best if you're gonna drink tap water, you got to put it through that first. If there's things in your water that don't need to be in there and you don't want to drink them, reverse osmosis is best, but you need to add minerals back to the
Right.
reverse osmosis water, because once you take everything out, then there's no minerals, and water is always supposed to come with minerals. That's the way it comes in nature. And so, yeah, you want to add minerals back. I use Redmond Relight, but there's ketone minerals and there's beam minerals. There's lots of good ones out there, but I use Redmond Relight. I like that one because it's from a seabed, an old ancient seabed that is not contaminated like the modern day oceans are. So yeah. Anyways, yeah, and then I structure or energize my water as well by putting it in the sun or swirling around the glass, vortexing it, things like that, because the coherence of water is also very important. And that's the way nature has water. Water's not sitting still in nature; it's always moving. It's crashing on the beach. It's going around in tides and ocean currents. It's evaporating and precipitating. It's flowing in rocks over rocks and rivers and things. So it's always moving and being kind of jostled around. So that's what I want to do with my water. Because after it's been spent so long coming through tubes,
Yeah.
laminar tubes, it gets kind of dead and incoherent. And we need the water molecules to be more communicating to each other, to be actual healthy water. So I, you know, stir it around or put it in the sun or whatever.
That's a great idea. I actually never thought about that.
Mm.
You're right.
Yeah,
Makes
it's called the hexerotrophy of water. There's some interesting literature about it. There's actually case reports of people who had like water stored in like a bomb shelter or something, and it was just sitting there stagnant forever. And then unfortunately, they had to go into the shelter and they drank the water and got really sick because they should have like mixed it around first. So like when water sits like that, it's not supposed to be that way. Um, so yeah.
interesting. I'll have to look that up. Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you started earlier on talking about how cholesterol obviously is not the problem with heart attacks, which a lot of Western medicine unfortunately still thinks. What are your recommendations for listeners who have had heart attacks or have a predisposition to that in their family, as far as diet goes?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, as far as diet, eat a whole foods diet. That's the most important thing. I don't think that we should be dogmatic about diet. Like there's the carnivores out there, there's the low carbers, there's the paleo people, there's the vegans, everything. Most importantly, eat a whole foods diet. I think animal foods are incredibly important. We have to eat animal foods. As humans, that's what made us human, is that food right there. So we need to incorporate that. But then otherwise, just eat a whole foods diet. But I actually don't think that diet is the most important thing to pay attention to when it comes to heart disease. I think that infrared light exposure is probably the most important thing to pay attention to, because of the effects of infrared light and structured water in the vascular system and how it directly inhibits the formation of clotting material, which is what atherosclerosis and heart attacks and strokes and any pathology like that is clotting material. So if you look at everybody wants to look at the diet and how the diet has changed over the last 120 years or so when heart disease became an epidemic. And it has. We have eaten a more processed food diet, but we have also had an extreme change in light environment. So it used to be that we were outside and then, we had fire, which is high in infrared. And then Edison invented the light bulb, which was an incandescent bulb, which is high in red and infrared light. So light gets hot. And then in the 50s, we get fluorescent lights invented, and they're very high in green, and not in anything else really. And then LEDs were invented in the late 70s, and they became more widely spread or widely used in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then we got blue screens and all this technology, and we were just inundated with light that has no red or infrared. We're living indoors away from the sun. We're told the sun is bad for us. And when you look at the effects of infrared light on structured water in the vascular system, and you look at the science and the research and the clinical trials using infrared sauna and things like that on the vascular system, it's absolutely phenomenal. And so it makes sense that we've had this epidemic of heart disease growing over the last century and a half when we've removed ourselves from that source of infrared light for a large part. And then we've added in the inflammatory thing. So we've lost the protection of the infrared light building the structured water, protecting the arteries. And then we add the toxins and the processed food diet, and we're just insulting the lining of the artery with those things. So it all matches up. And then we interfere with the ability of the arteries lining to heal itself because we're insulin resistant, because we've created metabolic health, poor metabolic health, and our circadian rhythm is off because this artificial light is disrupting our circadian rhythm. We're supposed to be synced up to the day-night cycle and have very clear signals of when day and night is. And we have artificial light on after sunset, it disrupts that, and we don't get the healing, repairing, cleansing sleep that we're supposed to have when we don't have that melatonin production. So now we're not even repairing the arteries when they do get damaged. So it's just like this, one thing after the other, and it totally explains pretty much all disease, but especially heart disease.
Exactly. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Very cool. So if listeners want to get in touch with you, if they want to purchase your books, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you, Stephen?
My website is resourceyourhealth.com. And my books are on there, and my blog is there. That's where I do my health consulting from, is that website. So people can find stuff there. I'm also on social media, a bit reluctantly, but I'm on social media. And it's Dr. Stephen Hussey, Dr. Stephen Hussey, Stephen with a PH, on Instagram and Facebook and X. So people can reach out to me there as well. Um, I also have online courses, and I have a health community that people can join, and have resources within the community as well. So, yeah, lots of different ways to get involved.
Wonderful.
My books
Well,
are on Amazon
oh,
also. So,
perfect. We'll make sure that we link that.
cool.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time. Have a safe flight.
Yeah.
And we'll make sure to share all your information.
Thank you so much.
All right, take care.
See ya.